Welcome all. My name is Defne Ayas and I'm the director here at Witterevit. Thanks for coming to this wonderful get-together where we will hopefully avoid the trappings of curatorial navel-gazing, because the ambition of the summit is really to put the focus more on the relationship between artists and curators, and especially focus it even more to how artists navigate the field more than how curators shape the field. So we're really excited by the group of speakers who have agreed to participate. That's also happening thanks to Mondrian and Art Rotterdam, that we were able to round up such a great group of people who all in their own practice avoid the optics and the branding and everything that sometimes comes with the curatorial world. So really the integrity of each speaker is probably the key word today. So we're going to have a lineup of 5 dialogues, and there will be responses hopefully by you, by the audiences, but also by our curatorial team with Natasha Hoare, Adam Kleinman, Samuel Salamakers. We're streaming live, so hello to that universe out there. So hopefully it will be a productive day. Am I missing anything? No? Oh, well, lineup, everybody who will be speaking, bios, abstracts are here. We have one boat Skype coming in with Adam Sutherland, who's stuck on the boat from London to Rotterdam or something like that. So that will be an experience. So we're going to start with that, actually, right? So with the Skype call.
Can we see? Maybe you should turn around so you see each other. Up. Here we are. Bonjour. Hello, everybody. Damn.
Sorry I couldn't come. I couldn't stand the ferry. I got on the ferry last night and it was unbelievable. I had to get off. So I'm really sorry. Apologies. I'm living up a hill for too long.
Yeah, you've been with chickens for too long.
Yeah, too many chickens.
Chickens, pigs.
So, yeah, what I thought maybe, Laure, is if I talk a little bit about some of the kind of background of the way that I work and the way that Grizedale works. Mm-hmm. You could talk a bit about your approach to making work and curators, and then we can have a discussion about the actual pieces, lots of works really, that we've been making together. And then we can do some questions. So,
sounds good.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's useful to understand a little bit about Grizedale. It's based in the middle of nowhere. It's in the Lake District. It works with a very small community, and it's publicly funded. So I am principally a civil servant, and I kind of understand myself to be that. But my role is to through some public funding, although not entirely, to service the public's appetite for art, perhaps as a slightly, bearing in mind they probably don't have an appetite for art, but to kind of think about how people use art on a day-to-day basis. And in a place like this, there is no kind of interest in contemporary art. It just isn't a relevant thing. And although we could, when we have in the past done lots of work with artists, the way that we work now is to try and think about how the creative aspect of an artist's work is of value and of use in an everyday context. How does that work in everyday life, and how do people use it and then value it? And that's actually something in the last, I'd say in the last 5 years, that we've really been very successful with. And I would say now that locally people have embraced the idea of using creativity and actually welcome it and look for it and demand it. And that is the kind of basis that we were able really to develop the work with Laure, which made that work so successful. I mean, I just was briefly kind of thinking about, in a way, kind of I've been working in the art world for a long time, but I started as an artist, and I'm not really a curator. I'm the director of the organization. I'm also like the technician, and I do a lot of washing up. So it's kind of pretty broad, and it's pretty normal life and every day. And I think that's kind of in a way a deprofessionalizing of a lot of the kind of professionalized roles that have evolved in the art world. So in a lot of the artists that come to us and that we work with have very different motivations. They don't really have the same, they're not trying to achieve the same things that we're trying to achieve. And there's a lot of different kind of ways of making work. There's making work for galleries. There's making work for its own sake, which still kind of comes up quite a lot. Talking about the art almost as a separate entity. And there's the academic and university orientated making of work, which again kind of is in its own world, and the public commissions and the public space and a kind of an endorsement of an artist's work from the public sphere. So I think trying to find ways in which the artists sort of benefit for some of the ambitions they have, and at the same time we were able to translate that into things that we need to function. I should say that Grizedale does have this kind of two strands to its work. We have this very everyday, constant working locally, but we also do work outside of UK and principally in the art context. So there's a sort of a constant translation between the two, and the project with Laure is quite a good illustration of that. So I think when we get on to talking about that, that will be more apparent. What else did I make a note about? Working with Laure was not at all typical of the way that we normally work. So partly Laure's not particularly typical in many ways, but also the commission came about through quite different. Commission came about differently than how we would normally function. So it was, the project initially was designed for the art world, and from our point of view, the reason to do it was quite strategic within the art world rather than thinking primarily about our local context, which would normally be our starting point. But because Laure's got this very kind of a very open approach to how she makes work, with that very quickly became partly the tension in the work itself, but also we were able to translate it quite unexpectedly in a way into our local community and make that work. So anyway, that's probably enough for me. Laure, why don't you talk a bit about some of your broader thinking?
Where should I start? Oh, yeah, I think definitely when I'm thinking of us working together was it was much more a place of discussion and, as you say, cooking together and sort of moments where I never seen you as a curator in some ways. It was more like, let's make something together and let's and you would always come and suggest, oh, why don't we involve the youth club, and we start building the shed, and then and then Peter, there's this amazing sort of painter who does it purely for himself, who start doing paintings for me. I would commission him to do portraits for the project, and so I don't know, my way of I felt it was being taking care of each other's. I was coming with ideas, and you were coming back with other ideas, and so it's this idea of caring and being in a place together. And I guess Grizedale is quite an unusual place. First, you can't escape it. You're totally stuck in the top of the hill. You have your only friends is the cat and a few and grumpy people around sometime. But great food, and what was for me amazing, it was in terms of discussion and production. I remember you were telling me about a woman who moved to the Lake District, who were sort of, I don't know how history has changed itself, how we remember this woman as an activist towards the end of slavery, and everyone remembers her as a black woman, where she was actually white. And then the whole project starts to become sort of this idea of history. How do we keep history? How do we reimagine it? How society reimagine it? And then there was this project was around an artist called Schwitters, which had a shed there, which so it became, and then all the fictional aspect. I was very interested in the fictional aspect of history, or how history sort of becomes fictional.
Laure.
Yeah.
So the commission came from the Tate, in fact.
Yeah.
Which was what for us would have been. I mean, we do quite a lot of commissioned work, but this was a kind of, in a way, from our point of view, quite strategic project to do something for an exhibition. So that was for us, very different. We never really make things for exhibitions in a formal sense, and also a historic exhibition.
Yeah.
So
no, but for me as well, it was like,
the process of that project evolving with you, and all that kind of historical context is probably something we wouldn't really normally engage with that much.
Yeah, you'd be much. It was more interesting where we would eat at lunch and.
Oh yeah, sure.
No, but I think.
Like. But
we had to curate every meal very carefully and care for each other.
I think it was that for me. That was quite an interesting part of the project, and something we've never discussed actually. Whether the kind of core idea of the project really came out of the conversations, or whether it was something you already had in your head that was quite fixed.
I think it was very a lot of conversation. A lot was from our discussions in the car going to pick something, or I don't know. There's a lot of influence of the place where we were and how we.
Maybe
I think it's quite unusual. It was quite unusual in that sense, because often I'm asked to propose a project, and I think this was much slower process and a lot about our time and the place there, I guess, as well. And all the weird peoples that live around there as well, so it sort of influenced each other.
If people haven't seen the project, which is called Wantee, the course of premise of it is a battle between two people, one who's making art and the other who's trying to translate their art into something useful, which is kind of what we were trying to do to Laure while she was at Grizedale. So we wanted
let's use that artist as well as possible.
It would make as much as we can.
Yes, squeeze.
So draw you into kind of the process that we normally have, and this everyday kind of community program with youth clubs and the older generation and the local artists that we work with was very much part of that. And I was never quite sure how much you were directing that, or how much I was directing it, or whether it was it just evolved naturally and happily. And of course that isn't always the case. That's quite if you're talking about kind of a role for the curator, quite often we will have quite difficult and quite frictional relationships with both communities and with artists for that matter. But as to how that works, and of course that's would be to be expected. And we have a very different process now that where we introduce people to the idea of being useful, actually they're going to be part of everyday life. And that's a much a different process than it's the same result really that you went through, Laure, but it's more like organized now, as in people come as volunteers and they do internships, and then before they start making commissions. I can't remember why I was telling on this trajectory. Feel free to jump in. Talk about perhaps talking about. So the project initially is designed to go into a historic exhibition about Kurt Schwitters. in the Tate, Britain. So a really formal setting. And
yeah, and I think it was quite helpful to have that really sort of rigid setting, and I think we were trying to question the ways these shows are made and how art is kept in a very large sense, and how it's represented, how it changed with time, how it changed, how the museum or the institution wants to. And I think Grizedale was the perfect, I guess when Tate invited us both to work on it, they were thinking of that, and how, what's the role of each. Yeah, I think it was very, the dynamic was really, really helpful. I mean, the way I work is quite organic, so it was very welcoming from my side. I love having a lot of things coming towards me, and it was very active. I mean, it was very much, oh, let's go and find a table, let's go and get something made there, and let's go, which was very, I don't know, it was a lot less in the mind, but really in the making process. And so it became like we were caring for each other for a period of time, and I don't know, but it's yeah, it always changes, I think, the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite unusual, I guess, from your perspective, in that you didn't actually need to spend that much time here. The project was kind of
I had to escape.
Bear in mind,
I am not scared of boats or planes.
But yeah, I mean, there was a kind of they built up an energy which you were happy to allow to happen. Really, like, I mean, the youth club were involved in building quite an elaborate film set for you to make your film within, which is a building that which is still functional. I thought that was quite interesting, because you weren't that. I mean, there were some requirements for the building that you needed, but after you weren't that interested in the actual building itself until you'd made the film in it. And then when we were like, okay, now we're going to turn it into a pottery, you were like, it's my installation.
My sofa, it's all muddy. Everything's done very muddy. It's like, what do I do with that? But it was also, I think, that one big thing that made it very easy, it was called Wantee, and it's all about tea, you know, and tea in England, you couldn't make anybody else happier than British people, so everyone was up for it. So it felt having all the, and especially Adam loved making teapots for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was great. We sort of, yeah, I don't know, the whole, I think it depends on the project, but the whole thing of involving the whole, most of the villages, even, we had a grandma who was knitting tea cozy things, which are drawn by us, and it was how the whole, they start playing, they played with us around the fiction in some ways, and they enjoyed having it, because it was still very physical. I mean, it was object and teapot, so it was very accessible in that sense, maybe, no?
So all that kind of physical stuff had its kind of relevance locally, and we were able to, in fact, after the project, after you won the Turner Prize, we were able to show the whole project in the village, in our local museum. And of course, that is the kind of thing that normally we wouldn't do that normally, because that would fill people with horror, hardcore contemporary art in a small community museum. But because so many of them had been involved in making it, there was quite a big enthusiasm for it, and it came with the kind of Tate Turner Prize brand, which I was kind of surprised, actually. I think people registered its use as being marketing, as selling the place, and to some extent a slightly different image of the place. That's not to say that quite a lot of people on the committee of the Institute and the museum did tell me that it was absolute rubbish. But
I got a turnip prize when I arrived, which was great, which is all I deserved. But it's yeah, it's and I still after this branding thing of the institution is. I got my grandparents as well, so say, "Oh, can we see what is your work about?" Then it's like, "Oh, stop! It's too fast." Like, what is? So you start suddenly you enter another, which is interesting. How does it communicate, or how it miscommunicates? But it's also I think also the whole work was also about being misunderstood, being mis.
Yeah.
So it was sort of discussing, oh, I hate this, or why is this fair, or how. So I think it was much more, we were already dealing with that, so I think there was maybe more humor in it, I guess, for...
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure how many people got that locally. But yeah, I mean, clearly that's what the main tension in the work is about, use and uselessness. And played very nicely into this particular context. So it's kind of tailor-made. But yeah, I think quite a lot of that came with you, as in your, as you were saying, with your own kind of dilemma.
I think it's something you often have. You have to explain what you're doing, or you have to go to the hairdresser, and you're like, I make watercolors, or how far do you go in the conversation? And I went to the bank the other day. So the banker was just lived next to Muka in Antwerp. So have you ever been? Really, it was like 20 meters. Like, there's this hatred of that place. Clearly doesn't want to go there ever. And say, oh, next time I come, maybe you should try. But it's sort of, how do you? There's humor in it, but at the same time, there's some sort of sadness as well. Why can't we exchange something together? It's like, oh, but I'm just into numbers, I'm not. Yeah. So I think with the village is such a smaller community, sort of it's complex. It's almost the big society in mini, like a mini family. You have to find your place in it, and it's because of that small community. It's clearer. Your role is clearer. My role is clearer, and I think which is interesting.
It's only slightly smaller than the art world, though, of course, the village.
Yeah.
Perhaps what would be interesting is for you, I don't know, to put you on the spot slightly, but what would have made, in terms of curation, what made that a different experience than perhaps a more typical curatorial project, or maybe it is a typical approach. I live up a hill. I've no idea.
Yeah. I guess it's so personal. I find it each time I work with somebody, it's sort of this dialogue you have with, but usually the great thing is when you're invited as an artist, the person who's invited you is interested in what you do. So there's already you're already on some level of interest.
Yeah, that's unique, I think, to us, being pleased to see the artists when they arrive in a residency program. Yeah.
Sorry?
We go as residents to lots of places, and it's really noticeable how often you get a sense that the organisers are really not that pleased to see you, despite the fact they've invited you.
Really? Well, maybe you didn't turn up, or... Sorry.
It does happen.
No, sorry. No.
I'm always rather unwilling to engage in this kind of conversation.
Yeah. I don't know. I think. Yeah, there's always there's moments where it's. I think the way with us at work, I think it was also long term, and it sort of grew slowly, which was very. And it's not the typical. I was not in a museum situation. You're not in an institution situation, so it was closer to residencies. Like, it was an interesting mix of.
Yeah, I think that is quite a shift that we've been doing for quite a long time, where there is no expectation that the relationship with the artist is going to end. So
and there was no limits of time. You just which was. it was more like knowing each other over time and knowing how to work together, and I think that's really healthy in terms of giving time to each other, and the project will come. There was a deadline because of the turn of the Tate show, but it was very sort of, with us it was very open. I think it went on for a year, but no, we could.
By the way, we're using the Wantee table for a dinner in Luton next week, if you fancy coming.
Oh, great. Yeah. Is it for a wedding?
What's wrong with Luton?
Usually it's wedding.
It has got an airport, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that's my I'm not sure we'll all go.
So I think that's about half an hour of conversation. So do you want to...
I think we did our job.
Maybe I can open up with
some questions. Hi Adam, it's Natasha. It's a question that I think I've asked you before, but I love hearing your answer, so I'm asking you again. Does Grizedale ever run the risk of being accused of instrumentalizing its artists?
Is my answer always the same?
I've only heard it once, so I'll judge now.
I certainly hope it is accused of instrumentalizing artists. I can't think of anything better than being a tool.
You the tool. Oh, we both.
Do you like being a tool, Laure?
Yeah, why not?
I mean, that is...
of a bigger machine.
And the way it works, and everybody involved in it as the resources that everybody's able to use. So yes, everything and everyone is a tool within the context of the organization. And ideally, they're all useful and valuable. And that contributes to a kind of a greater ambition, and that greater ambition is, as I described, really a very simple and obvious idea to place creativity back into everyday activities, everything we do, which seems so obvious, but it actually just is not the case. It isn't the case in a small community. It isn't the case in big companies, and it isn't the case in society in general. And it's a great loss. It's a great value for art, a great valuable role for artists, which they've in many ways turned away from. Or not intentionally, but I think it's just happened. And that's a bit too much of an answer.
And speaking of these historical trajectories within the locale of the Lake District in which Grizedale is based, I know that you've drawn greatly on the legacy of Ruskin in the Coniston Institute activities you do as well. Are there antecedents to your approach at Grizedale within the locality itself, do you feel? Or is this something that you've come in, is this a scheme that you've come in with and implementing?
Well, there are two antecedents in a way, because there's the Romanticism and the Romantic poets, Wordsworth, which in a way kind of defines the idea of the artist in the 20th century as a kind of romantic, heroic figure standing aside from society. And then there's Ruskin, and Ruskin's turning away from that concept and trying to instrumentalize art, give it a function. So Ruskin really denied everything as art, and he commissioned a lot of work, but he refused to acknowledge that it was art, and he refused to acknowledge that he himself was an artist. I think that's kind of we're not Ruskinians. If you're in a place like this, the local culture, you kind of absorb it through osmosis. It's unavoidable. But we're not great academics on that. But these are kind of a strong sense and theme. Obviously, with Ruskin wrote essays and so on that inspired the arts and crafts movement are very much about placing, his interpretation anyway, was about placing craft and creativity as the important part of an economy rather than the monetary notion.
Hi. My name is Samuel, and I have two questions. Maybe the first one picks up on what Natasha just asked, asking if Grizedale instrumentalizes the artists they work with. But I was also curious, I thought the question would be, or that's my question, how do you, what's your response to saying, are you instrumentalizing the community you are working in to work with the artists you bring in? It sounds like, is it every project you do where the community is involved with the project, or was it specifically with Laure's project? And in that sense, are you instrumentalizing your community rather than the artist?
Yeah, the priority, I would say is the community's engagement with the project. So Laure's not typical. There's more art in the project with Laure than there might normally be. And a lot of the projects we do are things like making a new building, one of the big changes, I think, and the important, perhaps the breakthrough in terms of my own career in the art world, in the arts generally, was to respond to invitation and not to try to create things that we thought would be useful to people, valuable to people, but only to respond if people asked us specifically to help them do something. So then we end up with projects that belong to somebody else that we are expanding and developing. So yeah, most projects are probably more community orientated than the one with Laure, in fact, and have less.
And mine, I think the way you worked with mine is like I totally lost control of it at the end. I think it's like you're making more you're making more tables for weddings, and you just Wantee of expense all over the countryside. But I love that. I quite like myself. I'm interested in this idea of the artist controlling its own work. Or this, just in 100 years, how would my work be perceived anyway, or in another culturally in a different place? I think I find it fascinating, and I think we sort of found each other as an interesting platform where we can experiment and see how far I am losing control and how far there was still a very controlled, the installation was extremely controlled, the film was all shot with me and the people around, so it was very controlled. But I really love that fact that it's society will be, same with Schwitters, we end up choosing the few important work, his paintings were rubbish, everyone say, oh, they're just like crap painting from the countryside. How society decide what's worth keeping, what's not worth keeping, and I think this is an interesting side of the project where I am losing my own decision almost, and what is the typos are the most successful part, maybe because that's what people want. But it's sort of and with Kurt Schwitter being really the example for the retrospective, where suddenly they realize that maybe his country landscape were not that bad, so let's get them back and show them in but during the days period, they were really like the worst thing you could do, and how that demand gets I think it's losing control is definitely for me an interesting part of my practice. So I don't know,
I mean, that's from our point of view, that's also the ambition really, is to foster something and then lose control of it. There's nothing more satisfying than seeing a project go ahead and evolve and develop, and the amalgamation of a whole load of different kind of input from artists to whatever other people are working in the village and so on, and for the thing to evolve and disappear off. So in fact, what has become the Village Table, which is a community catering company, now is able to do things without us and without you, but still using all the things that we have established and set up. So that's the legacy is kind of really is most important. If it works, and they normally do, most of the projects have this kind of we're trying to tie into them some kind of local economic viability and sustainability. They might have an art world economic value, but the local economic value and the community and use value is very different. And it's, the price is very, and in monetary terms, it's very different as well. And who it benefits is very different. So that's kind of, that is very much.
The mud gets much more expensive in an art fair.
Yeah, sure does.
My second question was more to you, Laure, in terms of, on a more general level, your relationship to curators, and prompted by the specificity of Adam maybe being the mediator to this very, very specific local setting, a small scene where you come in as a alien, let's say. Do you think in general that's something, or that you hope for in a curator, in whichever constellation you're working with, is that they be that mediator within to the context that you are brought into, be it a big museum or a small community or a biennial, or are they that bridge builder to you between what you do and what is happening around, or the place that it ends up in?
Yeah. I don't know. I think
or maybe
I think the way I feel always, just when I go home, just I think the when I'm invited, usually the bigger sort of the art world is slightly more closed on itself in some ways, or you're with people who understand what you're doing constantly, and they're supporting and they're caring, and they but my practice is usually a bit more maybe from the outside. So the work is like, I think basically dealt with anxiety of being an artist, or like proving myself, oh, I'm not that bad, I know I'm crap at school, I'm crap but I'm gonna do art, and I get and how when I even meet at Christmas and my family asks me what I do and I have to explain, and it's very difficult, and how my position within the rest of society is definitely a big part of the practice in general. I think how, yeah, or just how the fictional, my sort of some sort of surrealness that how can it be sort of imported in everyday life? But I think when I work, it's mostly, I think when I feel comfortable as well when I'm invited with my curator who knows my work. I'm like, this is nice, they know what I'm doing, and there's sort of a caring. I made this new very short video where it's just a monitor whose hand who's like, I'll care for you, I'll always care for you, I love you, I know you'll be old, no one would care for you very soon, you'll be in a storage, but I care for you, and you're gonna be so passé, you're just so out of touch, but I'll care for you forever. And this hand was just playing in front of a, playing in front of a could be any artwork from a collection, but also anybody. But it's like, oh please. So there's this sort of still a place where you feel warm. I think I feel warm because I'm invited. Maybe being context outside your own world, it's much you have to confront yourself. Why do you do that, and how do you do it? So it's there's definitely some kind of warmth in it, but also there's competition, and you need to still be good, and not hopefully some people will care for you and keep making giving you space to try things, and I don't know if I answered.
And do we have a question from the floor?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Susanne, and I just have a question which is very simple. I just was interested in what actually happened, like what did the installation for the Tate look like, and did I understand it right? Like I kind of got a video table, cutlery, tea. So, and it all got back then to your place, Adam, to Grizedale. So, and now the community is like living with the table, but was there also like an appropriation of Mert's bow, which he planned to do at the Lake District? Or so I would be just curious to find out a little bit more of what, and how long was the duration the project was developed, or you were working together, Laure and you, and
well, when did we do this, Laure? When did it start? Like 5 years ago or something? 4 years ago?
Yeah, 3-4 years ago,
Yeah. So kind of going on quite a long time. And I guess the early stages of it were very much geared towards making an installation for the Tate. And then it's sort of, because a lot of local people are involved in making a lot of those things, it just it just slides into that being a kind of becomes everyday activity. So in fact, like one of the people that did a lot of the paintings for the installation, he just has done a whole lot of tiles under Laure's instructions. So which I did have in my bag for you, Laure.
Yes. I was meant to have a new bathroom tiled. No.
I mean, that would be an example of how a lot of the language Laure established in that project has infiltrated into kind of everyday. So a lot of the things that were made are used regularly, and the idea of kind of a village pottery has developed a lot, and the textile side of things. There's a whole lot of glasses just been engraved using the same imagery. So there's a kind of it's gently changed the culture of the local community in the village.
There's a lot of bum teacups now,
I
and
mean,
boobs everywhere. The whole village is covered of boobs. And because my granddad loves bums and boobs, so it's like all the teapots are. Who doesn't exactly? So it's tea and bum and boobs. It's like, you know, who.
It's not Laure Prouvost town there. I should point out there are like I don't know, 40 odd artists working on and off in a similar kind of process. So there's things like a shop and so on. And although I mean, a lot of the people that knit, that you can see the influence of the artists they work with in their products, although they're still kind of village local products. This sort of influence starts to pervade, but most importantly, the influence is that of creating and being creative and making things, and those are the kind of, they become the kind of cornerstones of people's wider involvement in other projects.
But yeah, the installation, the show was basically, we made a shed, we shot a film there, and then the installation was at Tate with a table with pottery that my grandma had made in because she it's a whole narrative around Kurt Schwitters. He called his girlfriend Wantee because she kept asking him, do you want some tea? And so then my grandma was a really good friend of Wantee, but my granddad was in love with Wantee, so she was trying to make sure, to please my granddad, she made teapots that had nice bum and
I was trying
leaves.
to save you from this explanation.
And at the end we showed the table with the teapot and the film in an installation, but then there's still the shed, there's still quite a lot of the what we use, no? There's still the sofas, which my granddad was digging a tunnel to Africa, but he's never come back, so the whole living room is full of mud, and it's still there in Grizedale.
Bits of it go off to other things. It's going to be at the Freud Museum, isn't it, in April? Corner of the shed. It's a bit and some new things that have been added into that. So it's constantly, it's truly Mertz, actually, funnily enough. I never thought of that.
Right. I think
We have to wrap up at that
Yeah.
point, so we say thank you very
Thank
much
you.
to Adam and
Nice
to
to
Laure.
see you, Adam. Ciao.